Kesubos Daf and Ches contains one Mishnah and two primary sugyas. The first half of the Daf, up until the Mishnah, is discussing our last Mishnah, where we had discussed where a woman who is an Arusa gets fed mizonos by her husband, who's a Kohen. The Gemara discusses how much truma he can give her, how much he has to give her chulin so that she could eat it b'yemei tuma. We'll have 5 opinions of Tanaim, and Amoraim will narrow down one of the opinions with 2 conditions. Then the Gemara will talk about what happens if there's a yavam, if she's waiting for marriage from her yavam. Does she get to eat truma at that point? Then the Gemara will discuss why the Mishnah says that there was a takana that took away truma from an arusa. What was the reason for that, and what changed from the first takana? Then we'll get to the Mishnah, which introduces the topic of whether or not a woman can opt out of the deal in which she gets mazonos, she gets fed in exchange for her ma'aseh yadayim, for her earnings. The Mishnah introduces that by discussing if someone is makdish his wife's earnings, if it's chal hektish or not. So let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara is discussing our last Mishnah, where we have seen that you have a situation where a woman is an arusa, she's engaged to be married to a man. After a certain amount of time when the wedding is due, he already has to feed her mazonos. He has to support her. If he's a Kohen, he can give her truma that she is allowed to eat. As we'd seen in the Raisa, she's allowed to eat a truma from the time she becomes an arusa, but there was a gzeira for one of 2 reasons that she was not allowed to eat truma generally, as we shall discuss later in the Gemara again. So the problem is that if he's giving her truma and she is going to be tmeya part of the time, b'tumah, so she can't eat truma. So what's she going to eat during that time? So we had 5 opinions of the Tanaim, how it's divided up. So first we had the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, who says he gives her only truma. He doesn't have to give her anything else besides for truma. It's her responsibility to sell that truma and buy chulin. She could only sell truma to kahanim, obviously, because no one else can eat it. Sell that truma and buy chulin so that she could eat b'yemei tum'asa. Now Abaye limits this opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, and the Gemara quotes a brisa which says the same limitations. He only has a right to give her all truma if she is a bas kohen, as well as marrying a kohen. She's also a bas kohen, so she's used to treating tuma bitahar. She's used to treating truma bitahar. She knows how to take care of it and how to exchange it. And also, it is only while she's an arusa, because then her father and her brothers can help her. They can take the truma to the market and sell it. And once she becomes an asua, she has to be given chulin to be able to eat b'yemei tumasa, because her husband is not going to take care of it for her, and her father and her brothers are not going to be around to take care of it for her. So those are 2 conditions. Now, this is Rabbi Tarfon's opinion again, that he's allowed to give her all truma. And the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva says he gives her half truma and half chulin. Half of what she gets in mazonos he can give her truma, he can give her chulin, and then she can eat the chulin while she is b'tumasa. Now, Rabbi Yehuda ben Seira says similar arrangement, except instead of half and half, he says it's 2/3 truma and 1/3 chulin. That's a fair arrangement. Now the Gemara quotes Rabbi Yehuda, third opinion, not Rabbi Yehuda ben Seira, but Rabbi Yehuda. He says he can give her all truma, similar to Rabbi Tarfon. The difference is Rabbi Tarfon says he gives her the exact amount that's due her. Rabbi Yehuda says he has to give her more, because truma has to be sold for cheaper than chulin. So she's not going to be able to sell the chulin, the truma, and buy an equal amount of chulin. She's going to be able to buy less. So he has to give her extra truma so that the amount that she sells can buy her a fair amount of chulin that she should be able to sell. You can't just give her the exact mazonos that she needs in truma full. Now, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is the 5th opinion, and he says he has to give her twice as much. And the reason he has to give her twice as much truma as what she needs is because not only do we want her to be able to sell it for cheaper than the chulin, but we want her to be able to sell it easily. We don't want to have to go scrounging around finding somebody to buy it for the most expensive price she could find. She should be able to sell it to anybody who's willing to buy it, and she should be able to use the money to buy the chulin that she needs. Okay, that's the summary of the 5 different opinions and the limitations by Abaye, and it's in the Brisa. Now the Gemara talks about where the Mishnah had said that a yavam does not give her truma to eat. If she's falling to yibum from erison, the yavam does not give her truma to eat, and the Gemara says the reason is because the limud of the pasuk is because it's the pasuk that teaches us that a man is allowed to give his wife truma is from kinyan kaspo, and this is not kinyan kaspo. He did not do any kiddushin to who. His brother gave her kiddushin. He has her falling to him as a mitzvah of yibum, and therefore there is no kinyan kaspo. It doesn't apply to her. Now, the Mishnah had discussed that it doesn't matter how many days she was in Arusa to her husband, and how many days of the year of the 12-month Arusa period she was in front of her Yavam. The Gemara says, if you're telling me that even if a small amount of days in front of the husband, she's not Zocha to Truma, certainly if there was a lot of days that she wasn't in front of him, the Gemara says, it's all stacked up in a way, going from this is true, and I don't even have to tell you this, I don't have to tell you that, and in Echami there is no Chiddush in the extra statements that are there. Okay, now the Gemara turns its attention to the fact that in the beginning, an Arusa was allowed to eat Truma, limited only once the time for the wedding has due and expired, but later they took it away altogether. That means as follows. He had 3 levels. Midaraisa, she's allowed to eat Truma, she's allowed to get Mizonos and eat Truma at all times, from the beginning of Erisin. The Mishnah Rishona, the first takana, was to say no, she can't, and the reason she can't until the wedding is overdue, until the husband has defaulted on the time that he has to marry her. Now, the reason that we said not to in the beginning was a machlokas we'd seen. He had Ula and Shmuel bar Yehuda. Ula had said the reason is because we're afraid she's going to give to her brothers and her siblings to eat Truma, which would be Asr if she's a Bas Yisrael. And Shmuel bar Yehuda said it's because we're afraid that the marriage is going to be cancelled and therefore she'll end up never getting to write the Truma in the first place. Retroactively, she was eating Truma and she was never allowed to. Says the Gemara, what is the reason for the third development? The third step was that she's never allowed to eat Truma as an Arusa even after the wedding is due. So Gemara says the reason for that is because of cancellation. We realized weddings are becoming canceled. We're afraid a cancellation was going to happen, and therefore she would end up eating Truma be'isr. So Gemara says, according to I understand. The first takana was worried about feeding her husband and brothers. That doesn't exist once the wedding is due because she doesn't live with them anymore. Her father and her brothers, that's not a problem anymore once those. The Mishnah Acharona, the final takana, said, okay, but we still have to worry about cancellation. But according to Shmuel bar Yehuda, its cancellation was the first takana, the cancellation was the second takana. Why should there be a difference in the rules? Why should the first takana say that once the wedding is due, she's allowed to eat Truma, and the second takana says not? So Gemara says the reason is because the difference between them was bedikas chutz. That is the checking out that occurs from the relatives. Is that reliable enough to assume that there's no cancellation that was going to happen? From the time that the wedding is due, this bedikas chutz, this external checking happens. So according to the first takana, that was enough. We don't have to worry about cancellation. According to the final takana, cancellations were still happening, and we could not rely on that. We now begin the next Mishnah, which talks about what happens when a man is makdish his wife's maaseh daim. That is the money that she earns, that she gives him, in exchange for the mizonos that he gives her. If he makes all that hektish, is it chal hektish, and therefore she's not allowed to use it anymore? Or is it not chal hektish, and therefore it is still hers? So what this really gets into is who owns that maaseh daim. The essential question here is that maaseh daim, which she gives her husband, is that hers? It's under her control, and she has the choice to give it to her husband, or to change this, or to decide she's not going to give it to her husband, or is it really her husband's and he could force it from her because that's what Chazal are mataking? What's that dependent on? So it's as follows: the maaseh daim, her earnings, are given to the husband, and he has to feed her from his estate. That's an exchange. The question is, which is the takana and which is given as a trade-off? So that's going to be a machlokes, which the Gemara will show us. And that's what's at the root of the sugi here. Now, before we begin the Mishnah, we have to divide between two types of maaseh daim. There is a minimum that she has to give, which the Gemara defines later as a amount of thread equal to the weight of 5 slime. The Chazal are mataking, she has to work at least that much. Anything extra, Chazal are not mataking that she has to work and that she has to give. However, if she works, she does give it. But as extra, she doesn't have to go to work if she doesn't want to. That's called the moser, the extra. So the Mishnah divides up these two halachas. The Mishnah says everybody agrees that the 5 slime worth that she is obligated to do, that belongs to her, and she does not have to give it to him. And therefore, if he's makdish it, then it's not chal, because she could always opt out of it, it's always hers. Now, the moser, the extra, that she doesn't have to work, but if she does, she gives him, that's a machlokas. And there you have Rav Yochanan Sandler against Rabbi Meir. Rav Yochanan Sandler says the halacha is that it is not hektish, and Rabbi Meir says that it is hektish. So the Gemara is going to go through this. The Gemara, first of all, introduces the machlokas as to which is the ikar and does she have the right to opt out. So the Gemara says the machlokas between Rav Huna in the name of Rav and Rish Lakish. Rav Huda in the name of Rav says the ikar takana was for the sake of the woman, that she gets mizonos. In exchange for that, they said she gives her ma'aseh daim to her husband. Should she choose to opt out, should she choose to say, I don't want mizonos, then she doesn't have to give her ma'aseh daim to her husband. It's her decision, and therefore the ma'aseh daim are really hers, because she could opt out of it at any point and say, keep your mizonos, I'll keep my ma'aseh daim. And that's a very simple way of understanding why the hektish is not chal. Now, Rish Lakish disagrees. Rish Lakish says, no, the ikar takana was that she gives him her ma'aseh daim. In exchange for that, they said he has to give her mizonos. But that is, again, not the ikar, and therefore he has a right to force the ma'aseh daim from her, and if he's makdish it, it's in his possession, and the hektish should be chal. Now, the Mishnah says hektish is not chal, which would seem to be a clear proof that everybody agrees, both time agree against Rish Lakish. So the Gemara, therefore, has a kasha on Rish Lakish. So the Gemara says the answer is simple. The answer is the Mishnah is not talking about where he has any mizonos to give her. He's too poor. Doesn't have any mizonos to give her, and therefore there is no ma'aseh daim. So Gemara says, okay, then what's a chiddush that hektish is not chal? She doesn't have to give him the ma'aseh daim. There's no chiddush there. So Gemara says, you're right, there is no chiddush. The chiddush is in the second half, that the extra is a machlokas between Rav Yochanan Sandler and Rabbi Meir. Now the Gemara just wants to bring one more proof. The Gemara has a proof to Rish Lakish from a Mishnah that says that they were mataking mizonos in place of ma'aseh daim, which seems to sound like the ma'aseh daim is the main thing, and mizonos were given as an addition to that. A proof to Rish Lakish. So Gemara says, Rav will just say you have to reverse the language of that brisa. It was the other way around. It was really they were attacking the ma'aseh daim to be in exchange for the mizonos. Okay, now the Gemara wants to move from here into the explanation of the machlokas about the moser, that is the extra that she makes that she doesn't have to earn. So the Gemara says that the machlokas is based on the fact that it's a davar shalei ba'al olam. She hasn't earned it yet, and she's not obligated to earn it, so it's not ba'al olam. If she'll earn it, then she'll give it to her husband, but at this point it's a davar shalei ba'al olam. So what's the machlokas about? Rav Yochanan Sandler says he cannot be makdish a davar shalei ba'al olam, and therefore the hektish is not chal. Now, Rabbi Meir says hektish is chal, and this will depend on the machlokas Rav and Rish Lakish. Rav Huna in the name of Rav and Rish Lakish. Rav Huna in the name of Rav will say that Rabbi Meir has to hold that a person can be makdish a davar shalei ba'al olam. Otherwise, there's no understanding as to how he was makdish this. Rish Lakish will say this is considered ba'al olam. Since he could force her to give it to him, therefore it's as if he has possession of her hands. Having possession of her hands, he could say that I'm makdish your hands to the one who made your hands for the purpose of the ma'aseh daim that they are going to produce. And even if he doesn't explicitly say that, the Gemara says, we know that Rabbi Meir holds that we touch up, we explain a person's words in the way that makes sense. And Rashi brings examples of where if a person says a lashon which is incorrect and it doesn't work, so we interpret it in a way which works. So Rabbi Meir says even if he didn't say a makdish your hands, well, he obviously meant a makdish your hands because that is the only way that it'll function. Now, the Gemara points out that Rabbi Meir actually does hold a person could be a makdish a davar shalei ba'al olam. The only question is it necessary to say that is pshat in this machlokes here? That's the reason that he says that the moser becomes hektish. According to Rav, it's got to be because the person is makdish davar shalei ba'al olam because he doesn't have rights to it. According to Rish Lakish, because he could force her and therefore he could consider it to be ba'al olam, you don't have a proof from here that a person could be a makdish davar shalei ba'al olam. It does happen to be true, Rabbi Meir does happen to hold that way, but there's no proof from here that that's what he holds. Now the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Meir, when does the extra money that she earns become hektish if he's makdish it? So the Gemara says, Machlekes Rav and Shmuel against Rav Ada bar Ava. Rav and Shmuel says that he doesn't have rights to it until after she dies and he inherits it. At that time, the hektish is chal. Rav Ava says no, he has rights to it as soon as she earns it, and therefore the hektish is chal right away as soon as she earns it. So the Gemara says, what are we discussing about over here? Now, generally, there's two things that he gives her. He gives her mazonos, and he gives her 1 silver ma per month spending money, per week spending money. So that one of those is for the main ma'aseh, the 5 slime weight that she has to work, and the other one is for the extra. So Gemara says, if he's giving her both of them, so then why would anybody say that you have to wait until he inherits it? He's giving it to her. He has the right to be makdish it. And if he's not giving it to her, so then why would anybody say that it's makdish right away? It's not his. So Gemara says the answer is as follows. The answer is that he's giving her mazonos and he's not giving her the silver ma of spending money. He doesn't have that. And the question is, what was in exchange for the silver ma of spending money? Is it the main 5 slime worth that she has to give him? Or is it the extra? And whichever one is in exchange for the ma, silver kesef, is the one that's not going to be chal v'hektish. So, Rav and Shmuel says that the mazonos is for the ma'aseh dayim, and the ma kesef is for the extra, and therefore the extra is not chal. The extra isn't his because he's not giving her the ma. And Rav says the other way around, the ma is for the main, and therefore the extra he has to give her. So another one says, what is this machlokes based on? Which one is which? Is the ma for the is the silver ma of spending money for the 5 slime fix that she has to earn, or for the extra? Or is it mazonos for the 5 slime fix that she earns, or is it for the extra? So the Gemara says, because the question is, which one is for which? Do you line up the one which is a fixed amount with the one that's fixed amount? So the ma, which is a fixed amount, is for the 5 slime worth, which is a fixed amount. And the one which is not fixed, that is mazonos, which is not a fixed amount, it lines up for the extra, which is not a fixed amount? Or do you go by what's shchiach, what's common? And mazonos is common, is for the 5 slime, which is common. And the ma, which is not so common, is for the extra, which is not so common. So that's a machlokes which is for which.